My name is Aiyana, I'm 19 and I live in West Cork and study in UCC. When I was about 14 and a half, there was just a big change in my life. I moved house and school and I had to leave behind all of my friends and also like gender dysphoria and then, underlying just body image issues. Kind of all at the same time made a recipe for an unhealthy coping mechanism that ended up being an eating disorder. I didn't really know what it was. I kept silent. There was a lot of shame because it's not talked about, and I didn't even actually find the word for what it was until I already had those behaviours for several months. Before any commonly recognised behaviours of eating disorders, there is the thoughts behind them, and any coping mechanism really comes out of a sense of a lack of control. Why it specifically became an eating disorder for me was because of the underlying body image issues. When that started manifesting as certain behaviours, and then those behaviours became a comfort zone, that's the spiral. Because once you're at that point, it's much harder to get out of that. It's not just one adverse childhood experience where someone told you that you looked fat or whatever. This is a constant reinforcing of certain beauty ideals, certain, body types, the striving for perfection. That's a consistent issue within social media and just general society.
A word that comes up in our work a lot, not necessarily for everyone, but is this idea of control. So an eating disorder gives a sense of control to the person, that things in their own life may be very chaotic, but they can control their relationship with food, and then it can then jump into things like over-exercising, the binging and the purging that we sometimes see as well. And there's a big piece as well that I think families often pick up on, so something we would see is a big change in a person's personality. The thinking patterns can become kind of very distorted, very kind of inflexible and rigid and very black and white. So it's really a multifaceted illness. It's not just the change in the relationship with food. And actually the research would say that certainly in anorexia, because of the physical malnutrition, the brain can shrink. So there are a lot of very serious and risky medical consequences of an eating disorder. And as much as it takes time to develop an eating disorder, it equally takes a very long time to then recover or be in recovery or consider yourself recovered from an eating disorder.
There came a point where I just didn't want to have that be my coping mechanism anymore. I was like, I want to recover. I don't want to be in this anymore. Because you get sick of it, right? Nobody wants to be like that. It's exhausting, but also you can't improve your mental health when your body is starving for calories. That's not how it works. One thing has to come before the other. And that decision that I made, it was a big step in starting that recovery journey, and it was necessary that I let go of that fear of no longer having an eating disorder. It probably sounds a bit strange to anyone that hasn't experienced that, but it's definitely very, very real, because it meant another change. It meant letting go of control. It meant examining a lot of different things that were behind it. So I consider myself to be recovered. The thing is, while I no longer rely on the behaviours, for me, I do have to be constantly vigilant of those thoughts creeping back in there, because all of the things that cause the underlying issues are still out there in the world, constantly being reinforced. So yeah, it's a process all the time of just being aware of thoughts. When the people around you don't respond out of their own fear and instead respond from a place of compassion and perhaps taking a step back from that kind of initial and completely understandable and valid concern, it's actually a lot more helpful. And the opposite, when people are reacting out of their fear, the feeling becomes a little immediately reinforcing that initial shame. You can't just tell somebody it's really dangerous, stop doing this, because it's assigning blame, but also it's this notion that like someone can just stop doing something because they're asked to, but like it's highly irrational. Nobody would be doing it if they could just stop, you know, like. The difference when you have like empathic and compassionate people around you that know about your recovery journey, a bump in the road becomes not a failure or like a setback all the way to square one. It just becomes exactly that, like you fall down and you have people to, you know, pick you back up, or even just wait for you while you dust yourself off, you know, like, and that's really, really important.